How's it going, everyone? My name's Cam and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be learning on how to de-part a chicken. So grab your knife and make sure it's super sharp. The sharper the better. Using a dull knife on raw meat will make it very difficult to cut through, and an overall sharp knife just makes the job a lot easier. I'd also really recommend putting down a wet cloth. That way when you put your cutting board on top of it, it helps it from sliding and moving around on the counter. Again, while using a sharp knife and raw meat, the last thing you want is to have a cutting board that's moving all around your countertop. Once you get your chicken out of the package, go ahead and flip it over. You're going to be looking for this one thin piece of string. Pretty much every single chicken that you find will be held together with a piece of string like this. As you can see here, I'm holding my knife in a pretty dangerous position right towards my other fingers. I wouldn't recommend at all that you cut it this way, and I probably shouldn't even have myself. Using a pair of scissors or even just cutting downwards is a lot more safer of an option. However, once you get the string off, you can just cut it and put it off to the side. Flip the chicken back over, and the first thing we're going to do is start working on one of the legs. It can be tough to see from this angle, but once we switch to the other leg, it'll be a lot easier, so stick with me. You're going to want to cut right in between the leg and the breast meat. There's actually no bones or really any type of actual meat here, it's just skin, so it's pretty easy to cut through. The chicken leg is attached to the actual spine of the chicken via only one bone, so you need to pop out the joint in order to get it. First, what I like to do, just to make the job easier for me, is remove any kind of just excess skin that's hanging around. Getting out of the way makes it a lot clearer, it makes it easier to see what you're actually doing, so I cut that and just throw it off to the side. I start making a few more smaller incision cuts right at the top of the chicken thigh. That way that the skin of the chicken thigh and the breast itself are completely separated. I then use the back of my knife to push back on the breasts and then peel back with my left hand to expose that bone, which I'm pointing out right there. I then take my knife and run it right in between the spine of the chicken and where that joint is, and all that is there is some meat as well as skin, so you can cut right through. Once you've done it a few times, it comes off like butter and is kind of satisfying as well. I then pull the chicken over and then do the same thing of removing the skin on the other side. Now that we got rid of the first leg, it'll be a lot easier to see what I'm doing on the other side of the chicken. I pulled the chicken over and the leg out. That way that the skin is nice and taut in between the breast meat and the thigh itself. And I make quite a few small incisions to separate it from the actual breast. I also cut away any of that excess skin that I don't need and toss it over to the side. I like to follow a technique where I only use my left hand on the chicken. That way only one of my hands has touched raw meat and my right hand can stay nice and clean on the knife. However, in this case, using the knife to separate it wasn't really working best, so I used both. It's a lot easier, and you can see me here pointing at that joint that you're looking to pop out. It sticks out and is usually pretty easy to see. Since my right hand touched the chicken, I went and washed it before touching my knife again. Grab the base of the chicken leg, and then take your knife and run it right in between the joint and the spine itself. I like to put the chicken on its side like this because it makes it nice and easy to see what you're doing. It's all meat and skin once you pass a joint, so you can slide right downwards and get your nice perfect chicken leg. Whenever I'm departing a chicken, and pretty much cooking in general, I like to have a plate next to me for whatever I'm actually slicing. That way that my cutting board can be stay nice and clear of any objects. I'm going to move the breast over there for now and the rest of the chicken carcass. That way we can focus on just separating the drumsticks from the actual thighs themselves. A chicken leg has two bones. They're one in the drumstick and one in the thigh. The key to separating the two is cutting perfectly right in between them. You actually don't need to pop out any joint. You kind of just need a feel for where the two joints connect and then take your knife and slide right through. I've done this plenty of times, so I do have a lot of experience and it takes some time to learn. You kind of want to look for a bump in the skin and then take your knife and put it right in between it. I get it nice and perfect right here on the first try, which is a bit of a flex, but it shows you the two pieces of the chicken perfectly. I personally like to eat the two of them separately, but if you want to keep the drumstick and the thigh all together in one leg, that's perfectly fine as well. It's all dark meat, so it cooks at the same rate. I grabbed the second chicken leg and I actually used the other drumstick to kind of help me line up where that joint will be. I feel for it to get in the skin, a small little bump, and then I run my knife right next to it. As you can see, I actually hit bone. I know I can feel it on my knife because it wasn't sliding right perfectly through. I simply take it and adjust it just slightly to the right, and it allows me to cut right through the chicken, no problem. Now that the legs are done, we're going to move them over to our side plates and move on to the wings. I would actually consider the wings as probably the easiest part, which is really refreshing right after the legs, which I would actually consider the toughest. Usually the wings, the grocery stores will tuck them right underneath the breast of the chicken. They do that so it fits within the package. So usually my first step is trying my best to take the wings out from underneath and kind of stretch them out. Sometimes it's easier than others. This time they're actually pretty difficult. So I try to pull them out as far as possible and, make the chicken do a little dance. Now before I get to cutting the wings, I'm going to go and wash my hands again. Since I use my right hand on the chicken, I don't want to pick up my knife with dirty chicken hands. The first thing that I do when cutting a chicken is actually put a little slice into the skin here. You can kind of think of it almost like where the elbow of the chicken would be. This definitely isn't mandatory, but I find that that skin can be quite restrictive when cutting later. It just makes the job a little bit easier now. The chicken has two knuckles, one at the front and one at the end. The furthest one goes right to the little edge of the wing, and you can actually slice right through it no problem, as you can see here. It takes a little bit of force, but it's nothing crazy. Now we need to pop the other knuckle out of its socket, just like how we did with the thigh. I again put force on the top of the chicken with my right hand, and then pop it out with my left. Once upon doing so, the two knuckles are separated, and you can cut right through, and you'll have your perfect little chicken wing. Once that's done, you can flip it over and start again on the other side. Then we're just going to repeat the exact same steps we did on the other side. First, pulling out the wing and putting a small incision through the skin right near the elbow of the chicken. Again, not mandatory, but I find it just makes it easier. Once you pull it all the way out, and you move it over so the camera can get a bit of angle, you can cut right through that far knuckle, no problem. And you can set those wingtips aside. Some people do cook those wingtips, but there isn't much meat on them, so I don't usually find the purpose of them. However, they are perfect for stock. Once again, we're going to pop out that knuckle, just like how we did on the other side and with the thighs. I try and cut right through, but again, you can see I hit the bone. Exposing it makes it obvious where exactly it is, and I can see the big white half of the joint. I cut right in between those two halves, and then bam, we have our perfect other chicken wing. Now take those two chicken wings and set them aside, as we'll get back to them later. The next thing we're going to move on, and the final step of departing this chicken, is going to be removing the two breasts from the rest of the carcass. Removing the breasts are definitely not the hardest thing to do on the chicken, but aren't the easiest. I would say the legs are the hardest, but the wings are probably the easiest, leaving the breast right in the middle. The first thing you want to do is cut right down the middle. Just a small, shallow cut. Doesn't have to be anything crazy. There's a breastbone of the chicken there that you will run your knife right along, and that's exactly where you want to be. You shouldn't be able to go any deeper. If you are, you're probably too far onto one side or the other. Try your best to cut away much of the skin to separate the breast as fully as possible. Then you'll want to pull them apart so you can expose and see where the breastbone is to get yourself ready to cut alongside it. The key for cutting off the chicken breast is to cut alongside the breastbone as much as possible, as everything to the left of your knife when you're cutting the left breast is all meat. So you want to be able to keep as much of it as possible. You're going to continually do sharp but shallow cuts down the left side of the breastbone. That way you can separate it from the actual carcass itself. Continually doing so over and over again until you get lower and lower. It's pretty much all meat, so you can almost cut straight down, but you'll feel the bone right on the right side of your knife and kind of can use it as a guiding to where you want to go. I use my knife to cut off any of the remaining skin that's still connecting the carcass from the actual breast itself. And then I continue with shallow cuts down the left side of the breastbone. It's not a completely flat surface, it's definitely more sloped, so you'll kind of be able to feel your knife going down the side of it. Again, this is something that takes some time and experience, and the more and more that you do it, the better you'll be. The one last thing that you do need to look out for is the final bone that's inside the breast itself. You can see it with the little red spot at the top of the breast there. I'm going to point at it with both my finger and my knife. That little bone goes from the carcass itself into the breast. Once you get through that, you're pretty much done, and all you need to do is just cut through the rest of the chicken. Just like that, you got a perfect separated chicken breast on one side of the carcass. That bone is actually something that I don't always see too often. I believe that sometimes with other chickens, it's more closely packed right up against the breastbone, so I cut by it without even noticing. However, this chicken that I have here is an organic chicken, so I think there's a higher tendency of it being more of a natural state and sticking further out. You can also take your chicken breast and flip it over and cut away any unwanted pieces or skin. Now we're on to the last piece of the chicken, the right breast. We're going to follow the exact same steps that we did before. First starting off with cuts right to the right side of that breastbone and then cutting shallow down the side of it to get as much chicken meat as possible. I would always recommend for people to buy full chickens whenever possible, as I find it personally a lot cheaper to buy it than each individual piece on their own, and also too, I believe it's better for the environment. I've always been a big fan of more kind of indigenous ways of life where they use the entire animal no matter what you're making. In a state like this, you can definitely do that. Not only do you get each and every piece of the chicken, but you can also take the carcass itself, as well as those wing tips and any skin you cut away, to take it and make it into some great stock. Unfortunately, though, being that I'm currently in university, I don't really have the means to use a ton of stock. If I were to make a massive pot of it, it would probably take me weeks to get through. Plus, at the same time, I don't even have a large pot and I don't really have the time as well. In the future, I definitely plan to pretty much make stock out of my chicken carcasses as often as possible. I continue making cuts down the right side of the breast, just along that breastbone like we did before. Funny enough, I never even ended up running into that bone that stuck out like did on the left side of the chicken, which definitely isn't something I'm going to complain about, and it's nice to not even have to worry about it. I do my best to try and keep as much chicken breast on the breast itself. Cutting too wide would leave yourself a pretty skimpy breast that I don't want. I make the final cut, and then bam, just like that, we have our separated chicken carcass. Again, definitely recommend using it for stock, but you can do really whatever you want with it. And finally, we have every single piece departed from the chicken. Way to go. I take my two chicken breasts and flip them over. You can do your best to try and fix the skin or manage them however you want. And just like that, you have now successfully completely departed a full chicken. You have your two chicken breasts, your two thighs, your two drumsticks, and as well as your two wings. I'd recommend you take it and put it into some type of tightly packed bowl that you can put in the fridge. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you guys again next time.